When we think about refugees fleeing conflict, our minds almost always go west, right? We picture these journeys towards Europe or North America. But what about going east? Well, it turns out for anyone looking for safety in Asia, they run into a really strange paradox. A safe haven that costs them something huge and almost completely invisible.
I mean, it seems like a perfectly logical question, doesn't it? Asia is this enormous continent, filled with stable, even prosperous nations. So, why isn't it a more common place to go for someone escaping Syria or Yemen or Iraq? That's really the question at the heart of what we're looking at today. And the scale of this whole thing just snaps into focus when you see this number. Less than 30,000. That's the total number of registered refugees from outside the immediate region, like Afghanistan or Myanmar, across the entire Asia-Pacific. It's just a shockingly small figure, and it tells you there must be some kind of massive, invisible barrier at play.
Okay, so what is this barrier? What's creating this invisible wall that basically steers asylum seekers away from an entire continent? The answer, believe it or not, comes down to a single, really important document. Here it is, the 1951 Refugee Convention. This thing is the bedrock of international refugee law. It's what legally obligates countries to protect people who are fleeing persecution. It literally defines what a refugee is and what rights they should have. It's the official rulebook.
And here is the absolute crux of the issue. The reason Asia is largely off-limits is that most countries there, well, they just never signed on. For many of them, coming out of colonialism, their priorities were all about national sovereignty and building their economies, not signing up for international humanitarian rules. And if you don't sign, there's no legal framework, no formal process for asylum, no obligation to help, period.
But, of course, there are always exceptions. A few countries did sign the convention. So you might be thinking, aha, so they're the viable options, right? Well, let's take a closer look.
So, let's start with Japan. It's a signatory, and it's one of the safest countries on the entire planet. It seems like it should be a perfect destination. But the reality on the ground, it's incredibly stark. Japan grants refugee status to less than 1% of the people who apply. For anyone from the Middle East, that number's basically zero. So, yeah, signing the paper doesn't always mean opening the door.
And it's pretty much the same story for the other countries that signed. South Korea also has a really low acceptance rate. And while the Philippines did sign on, neither country really has the infrastructure or the policy focus to handle asylum seekers from the Middle East. So our list of possible options is shrinking fast.
So after crossing almost every other country off the list, we're left with just one. The one single and very complicated primary option on the entire continent, Malaysia.
Hey, remember that number from before? Less than 30,000 refugees in total? Well, look at this. The vast majority, we're talking over 21,000 of them, are all in one country, Malaysia. The rest of East and Southeast Asia combined, they barely even make a dent. So Malaysia isn't just the main option. For so many people, it has become the only option.
So, what is it about Malaysia? What's so special? The funny thing is, Malaysia never signed the convention either. But there are three really practical reasons it's become the default choice. First, their visa rules are pretty relaxed for a lot of Middle Eastern passports, so people can just arrive legally as tourists. Second, there are already established communities there, which makes a huge difference. And third, the UN's refugee agency, the UNHCR, has a major operation on the ground, which is a crucial lifeline for registration and some support.
But this is exactly where our central paradox kicks in. The moment you arrive in Malaysia, you might have found physical safety, but you've essentially lost your legal identity. This is the trade-off, right at the heart of the refugee experience in Asia.
And this really breaks it down. On the one hand, you have real safety. Malaysia is a stable country, it ranks high on the Global Peace Index, you are actually free from war. But on the other hand, you have no status. Because the country isn't a signatory, refugees are just considered undocumented migrants. That means you have no legal right to get a job, no public school for your kids, and you live under the constant threat of being arrested and put in detention.
So you end up with this totally impossible choice. Asia's safest countries are also its least welcoming. A place like Singapore offers incredible safety, but zero asylum access. Japan is safe, but accepts almost no one. Malaysia is the only country that gives you both a high degree of safety and practical access. But as we've just seen, that access is a trap. It comes without any of your basic legal rights.
Okay, so if you can't work, your kids can't go to school, and you can't build any kind of legal life, what's the end game?
Well, the reality for refugees in Malaysia is that their journey is nowhere near over.
Bottom line, people don't go to Malaysia to stay. They go there to survive. It's basically functioning as a massive, continent-sized waiting room. It's a temporary stop where you just have to bide your time, hoping that your real journey, resettlement to a country that will actually grant you permanent asylum, can finally begin.
And that process is an absolute gauntlet. First, you have to get registered with the UNHCR. Then, you wait, and you wait. Only the absolute most vulnerable people, think those with serious medical issues, or women and children who are at high risk, even get referred for resettlement. And if you are one of the lucky few, you then get put into a global queue that is years long and brutally competitive, fighting for a tiny number of spots in countries like the US or Canada.
So when you put it all together, what do you get? For anyone fleeing conflict in the Middle East, Asia just isn't a destination of choice. It's a continent of last resort. It gives you a handful of options, and every single one of them is deeply flawed. And that leaves us with this one last, really difficult question. Malaysia offers physical safety from war, and that is absolutely invaluable. But it costs you your legal identity, your right to work, your kid's future. It forces you to become invisible. So you have to ask, is that really a safe haven at all?